Good day, mentors, and welcome to our Ed 112, the teaching profession class. This time, I'll have my short discussion on Unit 2 of our module in Ed 112 on foundational principles and concepts in education in the context for historical legal foundations of education. In this particular unit, we will have the following intended learning outcome. At the end of the unit, the pre-service teacher, you must have traced and explained the evolution and development of the Philippine educational system in the historical and legal context. This is taken from the BTI 1.1.1 and the CLO 1 of the CHED program outcomes. How did education evolve? How did Philippine education evolve? This particular part or this part of our session for today, we will be exploring the evolution of education and the evolution of Philippine education. Why do we have to know the evolution of education or end the Philippine education? The beliefs and experiences of education today rest on the history of this field of endeavor. By knowing what accomplishments of leaders in the past, today's educators attempt to build on their achievements. The education that we are experiencing right now is a product of the past way of educating our children. The beliefs and experiences of education today are actually a product of how our parents or the grandparents of our parents were educated in the past. Meaning, the happenings in the past are actually have an impact to the happening at present. How did education evolve? This will be related to primitive era, the Egyptian education, the Greek with Spartan education, Athenian education, and later Athenian education, and the last is Roman. Primitive education. It's on the way of life. Life among primitive or tribal people was very simple compared with the complex life that people have today. Their means of livelihood were hunting and gathering wild fruits and vegetables. There was no reading or writing, and information was transmitted through word of mouth, songs, gestures, ceremonial rites, and the like. The education was informal, unstructured, and it happens around the different areas where the person is engaged into conversation or to communication or to the different ways of life. The second is the Egyptian education. Egypt, the gift of the Nile, is situated in the northern part of the African continent. Ancient Egypt was a desert country, watered only by the Nile River, which flooded the country from August to October, leaving behind a very rich black earth. The government of Egypt was autocratic, ruled by a king called the Pharaoh, who had absolute power. They are into obedience and loyalty to their king who had an absolute power. What's the outstanding contribution of the Egyptian education to our education today? It's on the geometrical measurement and surveying. It's on numbers. The surveying and geometrical measurement knowledge are actually from the Egyptian educational practices. How about the Greek education? The Greeks are a mixture of the Aryan and Germanic people, two great races. But because of the presence of natural barriers such as mountain and bodies of water, they live in tribal isolation and develop differences. They considered it as an honor to serve their country in any capacity. There were many Greek city-states, but two of them rose above all others, and these were Sparta and Athens. Sparta was in the south of Corinth in the southern section of the Peloponnesian Peninsula. The Spartan education was based upon the laws of Lycurgus. It was the basis of Spartan political, social, and educational system. This turned Sparta into a totalitarian soldier state. The system lasted for 700 years from the 9th to the 2nd century before Christ, especially during the 5th century. They are into military training. They are into defense of their own state, meaning they are very loyal to their own country. Athenian education. The ancient Athens was the leading cultural center of the Greek world. Many of the most gifted writers of Greece lived there. They wrote works of drama, history, lyric poetry, and philosophy that have influenced literature up to the present time. In many ways, the city was a birthplace of Western civilization. Education was supervised by the state, although education was not compulsory. It was not clear, however, if the state maintained public schools. The Athenian education's contribution is on literature, on drama, on history, and philosophy. How about the later Athenian education? Athens became an empire in 479 before Christ when Greeks defeated the Persians at the Battle of Plataea. Athens, the head of the Lion Confederation, contributed largely to the victory. The triumph brought about attitudinal changes toward education among the Athenians. What are the outstanding contributions of later Athenian education? The Socratic method of teaching as far as the method is concerned. Socratic method is the question and answer portion, like for example in oral recitation. Another is the realm of philosophy. The greatest world philosophers came from the Greeks, among whom were Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and others. Another is the field of mathematics. Euclidean geometry has been studied for 2,000 years up to the present. Arts and classical literature are also great contributions. The last educational practice or educational compendium is on Roman. Italian peninsula was occupied by Italians, Etruscans, and Greeks who settled in Sicily and the south. The Italian tribes were the Sabellians, the Ambrians, and the Latins. Out of the mixture of these peoples emerged the strong, energetic Romans. These peoples also developed city-states and Latium. The city-states of Rome became the most powerful. The Romans judged things by their usefulness. You should have your utility. You have to take your role. And that is the contribution of Roman education. To further understand the different educational practices which have impact to the present educational system, I would like you to watch this particular video clip. And this particular video clip is actually a video uploaded through the YouTube. So I'll be showing you the video on the historical foundations of education uploaded by Mariel Paez Ruiz through her YouTube channel. To further understand things about historical foundations of education, let us explore the work of Ms. Ruiz. Historical foundations of education. The primitive education aims cultural pass from one generation to the other, conformity and survival. Contribution, the foundation of education at present. Influence in the Philippine educational system, values education and technology, and livelihood education. How about Oriental education? Aim, preservation of culture and development of social stability and social order. Contribution is the conduct of civil service examination. Influence source system, araling panlipunan, and values education. additional information, the two ways of learning: enculturation, learning our own culture, and acculturation, learning the culture of other people. Greek education, the Roman and Athenian, or the Spartan and Athenian, development of individuality and development of perfect man. Influence, Spartan is on physical military discipline, while Athenia is in physical and mental discipline. Contribution, physical and military training, and physical and mental training. Roman education. Aim, utilitarianism, developing students will become useful to our society later. Contribution, professional laborers and workers. Influencer system, the technology and livelihood education, and linguistics facilities. Christian concept of education has also an impact to our education. Aims, humanitarianism and brotherhood. Contribution, Christianity and human rights education. Influencer system, araling panlipunan, values education, language, particularly figures of speech. Monasticism, what is its impact? Aim to develop students to be morally upright and eternal salvation and spiritual discipline. Contribution, discipline, churches and convents. Influence, values education and the academics. Scholasticism, aim to develop students' intellect or intellectual discipline. Contributions, intellectual training, and the methods of teaching such as academics, lecture, and logical analysis. Influencer system, the lecture, the debate, and logical analysis as teaching strategies. Chivalric education. Aim, social discipline, social grace, preparation to commerce and business industry, and good manners. Contributions, trade and commerce or business or entrepreneurial activities. Influence, commerce and business industry, and junior and senior prom. Reformation. Aim, education for the masses. Contribution, Protestantism. Influence in the educational system, religion, and scholarship program. Counter-Reformation. Aims, bring back the people to Catholicism. Contribution, memorization with understanding, and the use of criteria of grading. Influence in the educational system, values education, and Christian living. How about the formal discipline of education? Aim, training of the mind and character development such as physical, mental, and moral. Contribution, tabula rasa, or we begin with a clean slate and we will journey for us to gather information, to gather experience, as well as sensory information. Influence, memory, mathematics, English, and physical education for self-discipline. How about rationalistic view of education and its impact? Aim to enable man to think for himself, intellectual freedom, and critical analysis. Influencer system, intellectual training, and social education. Naturalistic education. Aim to gain knowledge, develop an individual to the law of human development, and being child-centered. Contribution, two-way of learning, the learning by doing. We have to apply what we have learned. And that ends our summary of the historical foundations of education. And I'll now bring you back to our slideshow or our PowerPoint presentation to proceed with my discussion. I'll have to stop sharing first and let's have the sharing of the slideshow presentation. And we are now in the second part of our discussion, which is historical foundation of Philippine education. So how did Philippine education evolve? And there are four era or periods: Spanish, American, Japanese, and the present. First, the pre-Spanish period or before we were colonized. Again, we were colonized by the Spaniards 333 years. We live in the convent. That means the keyword is convent and that is related to education. But how about prior to Spanish colonization? The type of education is informal and unstructured. The home serves as their school. The parents serve as their teachers. Focus more on vocational than academics because they are taught to do household chores. Tribal tutors are called the babaylan, and most communities, stories, songs, poetry, dances, medicinal practices, and advice regarding all sorts of community life issues were passed from generation to generation, which were done orally. Some communities utilized a writing system called the baybayin. Alibata was the first form of alphabet used by early Filipinos. It is composed of 17 symbols representing the letters of the alphabet. During the Spanish period, in which we were colonized by more than 300 years, education was formal. Established schools from the primary level to tertiary level of education focus on the Christian doctrines because they are into religion. Separate schools for boys and for girls. Ilustrados, or the family coming from the prominent um, or the people coming from the prominent family were accommodated in the schools. They are called ilustrados. Missionary teachers or the friars replaced the tribal tutors as our first or our teachers. Catholic doctrine schools that were set up initially became parochial schools which taught reading and writing along with catechism. Education Decree of 1863 mandated the establishment of free primary schools in each town. There were three grades: Entrada, Ascenso, and Termino. The curriculum required the study of Christian doctrine, values, and history, as well as reading and writing in Spanish, mathematics, agriculture, etiquette, singing, world geography, and Spanish history. Girls were also taught sewing, but in isolation. The normal school run by the Jesuits was also established, which gave men the opportunity to study a 3-year teacher education for the primary level. Normal schools for women teachers were established until 1875. In the American period, we were colonized by America for 10 years. That is why it's 333 years in a convent and 10 years in Hollywood. Course of study is prescribed, uniform, and centralized. So the major contribution is formalizing the education that we have, which is adapted until today. Formal structured an existence of an educational system, and in the year 1899, more schools were opened, this time with 24 English language teachers and 4,500 students. Act number 74, Republic Act number 74, a highly centralized experimental public school system was installed in the year 1901 with the Philippine Commission. Between 1901 and 1902, the Philippine Commission authorized the Secretary of Public Instruction to bring more than 1,000 teachers from the United States, who were called the Thomasites, to the Philippines, and they became our teachers. Republic Act number 1870 initiated the opening of the University of the Philippines, now the country's national university. So Act number 1381, also known as the Gabaldon Law, was passed in 1907, which provided a fund of ₱1 million for construction of concrete school buildings. Philippinization policy of the government. The Reorganization Act of 1916 provided that all department secretaries, except the Secretary of the Public Instruction, must be a natural-born Filipino. It's an American influence or contribution. Old buildings of different public schools, they are called gabaldon, the old wooden building. In front, usually the social hall or the classrooms, no, and offices of our of the officials, no, school officials at present. Now, like for example, in Argao Central Elementary School, no, which is a gabaldon, no, building, and that was made during the time of American civilization. Japanese, we were in Kempeitai in 3 years because we were colonized approximately for 3 years by Japanese colonizers. To stop depending on Western countries like the US and the Great Britain, promote and enrich the Filipino culture because they love culture, to appreciate one's culture. To recognize the Philippines is a part of the greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere so that the Philippines and Japan will have good relations or relationships. To be aware of materialism, to raise the morality of Filipinos, to learn and adopt the Pongo and to stop using the English language, and to spread elementary and vocational education, and to develop love for work. They emphasized on values, and integrity. In the present education, the Philippine educational system was patterned to the educational system of Spain and the United States after the liberation of the Philippines in 1946. Filipinos had moved in various directions of its own elementary and high school, which is compulsory and is administered by the Department of Education, formerly called the Department of Education, Culture, and Sports. Now, we are into our present enhanced basic education curriculum under Republic Act 10533, and that is the K to 12. And according to my research, we are the last country to embrace the universal curriculum, which is the last country in Asia to imbibe or to use the K to 12 as a universal educational system. Another important foundation is the legal basis for Philippine educational system. Why it is important to study? Because the foundation of education at present is not just to be tackled based on its history, but the values laid in its foundation. The major legal basis for Philippine education is the Philippine Constitution, the fundamental law of the land, the 1935 Constitution, the 1973 Constitution, and the 1987 Constitution, in which we are currently using. The 1987 Constitutions um, gives emphasis on education in Section 1 that the state shall protect and promote the right of all the citizens to quality education at all levels and shall take appropriate steps to make such education accessible to all. Batas Pambansa bilang 232, the Education Act of 1982, the Republic Act number 74, and this law was enacted on January 21, 1901. It is the establishment of the Department of Public Instruction headed by the General Superintendent. Republic Act number 2706, and this was known the Private School Law, enacted on March 1917, which made obligatory the recognition and inspection of private schools and colleges by the Secretary of Public Instruction. Commonwealth Act number 1, amended by Republic Act 9163, known as the National Defense Act, passed by the Philippine Assembly on December 21, 1935, which provided in Section 81 that preparatory military training shall be given with the youth in the elementary grade school at the age of 10 years and shall extend through the remainder of his schooling into college or post-secondary education. Commonwealth Act number 80. This law created the Office of the Adult Education on October 26, 1936, so as to eliminate illiteracy and to give vocational and citizenship training to adult citizens of the country, which is non-formal in nature. Commonwealth Act number 578. This act also provided a penalty of imprisonment ranging from 6 months and 1 day to 6 years, and a fine ranging from 500 to 1,000 pesos upon any person found guilty of assault upon those teaching personnel, protecting the teachers in the Philippines. Commonwealth Act number 586, repealed by Republic Act 896. This is known as the Education Act of 1940. Commonwealth Act number 589. This law, approved on August 1940, established a school ritual in all public and private elementary and secondary schools, and that is the showcase of a solemn and patriotic ceremonies that include the singing of the Philippine national anthem and the patriotic pledges or the Panatang Makabayan. Republic Act number 139, repealed by Republic Act 8047, enacted on June 1947, and this provides that all public schools must only use books that are approved by the board for a period of 6 years from the date of their adoption. The private schools may use books of their choice, provided the board of textbooks has no objections with those books used by private schools. Republic Act number 896, and it is the Elementary Education Act of 1953. Republic Act number 1124, repealed by Republic Act 7722, that is on the formulating general educational policies and directing the educational interest of the nation, which was approved on June 16, 1953. However, this board, which was later renamed the National Board of Education, was abolished by virtue of the creation of the Board of Higher Education as stipulated in BP Bilang 232. It is now assumed by the Commission on Higher Education or CHED by virtue of RA 7722. Republic Act Number 1265 amended by RA 8491, and this provides that a daily flag ceremony shall be compulsory in all educational institutions, and this includes the singing of the Philippine national anthem. Republic Act Number 1425, it prescribed the inclusion in the curricula of all schools, both public and private, from elementary schools to universities, the life, works, and writings of Jose Rizal, that is a mandated subject in the college, and of course, in our third year and fourth year, the Noli Me Tangere and El Filibusterismo. Republic Act Number 4670, it is known as the Magna Carta for Public School Teachers. This was approved to promote and improve the social and economic status of public school teachers, their living and working conditions, their employment, and the career prospects. RA 1079, it approved on June 1959, and it provided the civil service eligibility and shall be permanent and shall have no time limit. Republic Act Number 6655. It is known as the Free Public Secondary Education Act of 1988, and that was approved on May 26, 1988. These laws are very important or significant in understanding the present educational system. That our present educational system, it was not just created by nowhere, but it is laid upon history and legal basis. You can read more about the historical foundations and the legal foundations of education by via our fls.ctu.edu.ph. I have there capsulated notes and as well as the activity sheets for accomplishments. And you may also use the communication superhighway to further understand the historical legal foundations of education. And you can even visit YouTube for more videos about the historical and legal foundations of education. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening and for watching this video on Unit 2 of Ed 112, the teaching profession. The topic is Foundational Principles and Concepts in Education, Historical Legal Foundations of Education. Goodbye, everyone, and God bless.